"You're suspended until you apologize to my ex," her husband, the CEO, barked in front of the entire company. Laughter filled the room. Her face burned with humiliation, but she simply said, "All right." The next morning, he smirked. "Finally learned your place." Then he noticed her desk, empty, her badge gone. Suddenly, the legal team rushed in, trembling. "Sir, what have you done?" He had just underestimated the power of a woman. This story will be better than any Hollywood movie. Watch till the end. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to your own family channel, where we share stories, love, and happiness. Today, my heart bows before every woman, the queens of patience, the pillars of faith, and the gentle souls who hold this world together with love. You are not just women. You are the heartbeat of families, the light in every dark room, and the reason this world still knows compassion. May peace follow your every step, may strength live in your spirit, and may love forever surround you. And my family, I ask one thing with tears in my eyes. Please pray for my beloved Binta. She's not feeling well, and your prayers carry power. If your heart is true, like this video, if your love is real, comment, "We're praying for Binta, our queen will rise." Some humiliations happen in whispers. Others happen in front of 40 witnesses who will dine on the story for years. Ashley Horn stood perfectly still as her husband's voice echoed through the conference room, each word designed to cut deeper than the last. Ben David had positioned himself at the head of the table like a king holding court, his expensive suit catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Everyone else had taken their seats, but he remained standing, performing for an audience that shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. "I'm going to make this very simple, Ashley." Ben's tone carried that particular blend of condescension and disgust that he'd perfected over the past year. "You embarrassed Goldie at the charity gala. You were rude, dismissive, and frankly, beneath the standards we maintain here. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to her publicly right now, or you're suspended indefinitely. And if you think I won't follow through, you're more delusional than I thought." Ashley's face burned, but she kept her expression neutral around the table. Executives she'd worked alongside for 3 years suddenly found their notepads fascinating. Margaret from operations cleared her throat and stared at the ceiling. Timothy from accounts actually had the decency to look ashamed, but he said nothing. No one ever said anything when Ben performed these little executions. Goldie Mann leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, victory written across her perfectly made-up face. She wore red, always red, like she was trying to embody every warning sign Ashley had ignored. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "I think we all witnessed Ashley's behavior," Goldie said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's uncomfortable for everyone when someone can't handle their insecurities with grace. Ben's been patient, honestly more patient than most men would be, but there are limits." Ashley felt something crack inside her chest. Some final foundation that had been holding up the architecture of her denial. She'd spent the entire gala watching Ben touch Goldie's lower back, watching them whisper and laugh, while he barely acknowledged his wife's presence. When Ashley had finally asked Goldie to stop calling Ben's personal phone at midnight with urgent questions that could wait until morning, Goldie had gasped like she'd been slapped. Now Ashley was the villain in a story that had been rewritten without her permission. "Well?" Ben's eyes were cold. "We're all waiting. Some of us have actual work to do." The room felt smaller suddenly, walls pressing in. Ashley counted the faces. 42 people in total, if she included the assistant standing near the back. 42 people who would remember this moment, who would tell their spouses over dinner, who would replay this scene every time they saw her in the hallway. She thought about defending herself. She thought about asking Ben why his ex-girlfriend had been copied on internal emails that had nothing to do with her role. She thought about asking him when exactly their marriage had become a public spectacle where she was expected to perform gratitude for being humiliated. She thought about many things. Instead, Ashley simply said, "All right." The word landed flat in the silence. Ben blinked, clearly expecting resistance, hoping for it. Even he'd staged this entire scene for the drama, and she'd just declined to give him his closing act. "All right," he repeated, suspicion creeping into his voice. "All right," Ashley confirmed. Her hands were steady at her sides, her voice calm. "If that's what you want, then all right." She turned and walked toward the door. Goldie had to step aside to let her pass, and for just a moment, their eyes met. Ashley saw the confusion there, the frustration that the victim wasn't crying or begging. She kept walking. Behind her, someone coughed. She heard Ben say something to Goldie, his voice lower now, uncertain. The satisfying click of Ashley's heels on marble was the only sound that mattered as she made her way down the corridor toward her office. Her hands didn't shake as she packed her personal items into a single box. 3 years of work fit into 12 inches of cardboard. The photo of her and Ben on their wedding day went in first, face down, her grandmother's fountain pen. The one that had signed documents building an empire went in next. The awards and certificates stayed on the wall. Let them explain those later. She removed her security badge from the lanyard around her neck and placed it carefully in the center of her desk. Her office keys joined it. Then she pulled off her wedding ring, the platinum band catching light one final time, and added it to the small pile. From her purse, she retrieved a single piece of cream stationery, her grandmother's monogrammed letterhead that she'd been saving for something important. The note took 30 seconds to write. "You wanted an apology. Consider this my resignation from everything." She didn't sign it. He'd know the elevator ride down felt eternal and instantaneous all at once. Ashley walked through the lobby where she'd entered every morning for 3 years, past the security guard who'd always wished her good morning, past the coffee shop where she'd grabbed Ben's favorite order more times than she could count. The evening air hit her face like a baptism. Her phone buzzed. Ben's name lit up the screen with a text. "Where did you go? Get back here. We need to discuss your behavior professionally." Ashley deleted it without responding. Then she deleted his contact entirely, watching his name disappear letter by letter. She drove to her family's estate outside the city, the gates recognizing her car and opening without hesitation. The house where she'd grown up stood against the twilight sky, every window warm with light. Her grandmother had died in the master bedroom 2 years ago, leaving behind instructions that Ashley had followed to the letter, even when they'd broken her heart. That night, Ashley slept in her childhood room for the first time in a decade, surrounded by memories of who she'd been before she'd made herself smaller to fit into someone else's story. The next morning, Ben David walked into his office at Meridian Global with the confidence of a man who'd won. He'd spent the previous evening with Goldie, celebrating Ashley's departure, planning how they'd spin this to make him look like the reasonable party. He'd even rehearsed his speech about giving people chances and being disappointed when they didn't rise to the occasion. His assistant looked pale when he arrived. "Mr. David, there are some people waiting in your office." "Tell them I need 10 minutes, Ben said, already checking his phone for groveling messages from Ashley that hadn't arrived. "Sir, they said it's urgent. They're attorneys." Ben's good mood faltered slightly, but he maintained his smile. Probably something routine that Ashley had screwed up before storming out. He pushed open his office door. 3 people in expensive suits stood near his desk. 2 men, 1 woman, all carrying leather portfolios that screamed money and power. The woman stepped forward first, extending her hand. "Mr. David, I'm Rebecca Walsh from Walsh & Partners. We represent the Horn Family Trust. We need to discuss some immediate governance concerns regarding Meridian Global." Ben shook her hand automatically, his brain struggling to connect the pieces. "The Horn Trust? I'm not familiar with that entity in relation to our company." Rebecca exchanged a glance with her colleagues. Mr. David, the Horn Family Trust is the majority shareholder of Meridian Global, has been since its founding. We're here because the trustee has invoked emergency governance protocols as of 7 o'clock this morning. The words made sense individually, but refused to form a coherent picture. I think there's been some confusion. I'd know if we had a majority shareholder situation. I'm the president of this company. Yes, the president, Rebecca agreed. But you're not the owner. The trust controls 67% of all voting shares, and as of this morning, the sole trustee has called an emergency board meeting to review executive performance and fiduciary responsibility. Ben laughed, an uncomfortable sound even to his own ears. Who's the trustee? I'll call them myself and clear this up. Rebecca pulled a document from her portfolio and placed it on his desk. The sole trustee is Ashley Elizabeth Horn, your wife. Though I understand there may be some question about that status as of yesterday evening. The floor seemed to tilt. Ben stared at the paperwork, seeing his wife's name printed in bold letters next to titles that made no sense. Sole trustee. Primary beneficiary controlling interest. That's impossible, he whispered. Ashley works in marketing. She's a junior employee. She doesn't own anything. The male attorney on the right spoke for the first time. Mr. David, Mrs. Horn has been the sole trustee of the Horn Family Trust since her grandmother's death. The trust owns this building, the company, and most of the assets you've been utilizing for the past several years. She chose to work her way up through the ranks rather than announce her position. That was her prerogative. But as of this morning, she's decided to exercise her full authority as owner. Ben's phone buzzed, a calendar notification. Emergency board meeting, 10 a.m., attendance mandatory. It was 9:45. Rebecca Walsh smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You should probably review those documents before the meeting, Mr. David. The board has some questions about your decisions, particularly regarding personnel management and the use of company resources. Oh, and one more thing. She pulled out another envelope. Mrs. Horn asked me to return these to you. Inside were his keys to the penthouse, the car registration for the vehicle he drove, and a brief note in handwriting he recognized. Everything you thought was yours was always mine. We'll speak through attorneys from now on. Ben looked up at the three lawyers, at his office that suddenly felt less like his throne room and more like someone else's property, at the clock ticking toward 10 o'clock, and finally understood that yesterday's performance had been his last act as the man in control. He just didn't know it until the curtain had already fallen. Chapter 2. The Architect Revealed. The boardroom felt different when you realized you'd never actually owned it. Ben sat at the long table, surrounded by 11 board members whose expressions ranged from confused to hostile. Rebecca Walsh stood near the projection screen like a prosecutor preparing her closing argument. Ashley wasn't there, which somehow made everything worse. Let's establish some facts, Rebecca said, clicking her remote. The screen filled with a family tree showing Ashley's connection to Eleanor Horn, to the company, to every asset Ben had believed was his to command. Meridian Global was founded by Eleanor Horn. When she passed, she left everything to her granddaughter with one condition: wait until you know who truly loves you for yourself, not the empire. Ben's mouth went dry as the implications crystallized. Ashley chose to work her way up authentically, Rebecca continued. She wanted to earn respect on merit. She took a junior role, contributed significantly, and never advertised her ownership. That was her choice. Theodore, the oldest board member, leaned forward. What's the concern here? Ben's been effective. The company's grown considerably. Has it? Rebecca clicked again. The graph made Ben's stomach drop. Revenue trends plotted against time showed a flat line during his bachelor years, then a sharp vertical climb beginning exactly when Ashley joined the company. The evidence was surgical in its clarity. This is performance before Ashley, Rebecca said, and this is after. Notice the correlation? Another click email screenshots filled the screen, timestamps visible. Ben recognized his own messages, his own words, but the context transformed them into theft, caught on camera. Here's Ashley's original proposal for the Westfield expansion, Rebecca narrated. Sent Monday morning. Here's Ben's presentation 2 days later, claiming it as his own. Ashley's name appears nowhere. Another click, another theft, then another. We've documented 73 instances of intellectual property theft. 73 times Ashley created strategies that Ben presented as his own work. Margaret from operations looked sick. Theodore's expression had shifted from confused to furious. Those were collaborative efforts, Ben protested weakly. We worked together. Collaborative. Rebecca's tone could cut steel. She displayed financial records next, each line highlighted in yellow, showing the same pattern. Ashley's trust backing everything, while Ben's actual salary couldn't cover half his lifestyle. The penthouse Mr. David lives in, Rebecca continued, owned by the Horn Trust. The vehicle he drives, leased through Horn Assets, the country club membership, the suits he wears, all funded by accounts Mrs. Horn established. Even the apartment he's been paying for Ms. Goldie Mann comes from those accounts. The room erupted, board members shouting, voices overlapping. Ben felt the walls closing in as Rebecca displayed more evidence. Restaurant receipts, jewelry purchases, 8 months of rent payments for Goldie's apartment, all from accounts Ben had accessed during the marriage. "You bought your girlfriend an apartment with her money?" someone yelled. The door opened. Every head turned as Ashley walked in, navy suit elegant and understated, hair pulled back. She looked older somehow, more serious. This wasn't the woman who'd quietly agreed yesterday. This was someone else entirely, someone Ben had never actually met. She walked to the head of the table, the seat that had always been symbolically his, and stood behind it without sitting. "I apologize for being late," Ashley said calmly. "I wanted Rebecca to present the evidence without my presence creating unnecessary drama." "Ashley, this is insane," Ben tried. "We can talk privately. We don't need to air everything here." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were a stranger's. "You made our personal issues public yesterday, in front of 42 people. You humiliated me because I asked your girlfriend to stop calling at midnight. You made this public, Ben. I'm just responding appropriately." "Mrs. Horn," Theodore interrupted carefully, "what are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we examine whether Ben David is fit to continue as president. I'm proposing we look at his judgment, his ethics, his actual contributions. I'm also proposing that certain operational authorities need immediate review." "You can't just remove me," Ben said, standing. "I have a contract rights." "You have a contract with performance clauses and ethical conduct requirements," Ashley replied. "Stealing intellectual property from the majority shareholder and then publicly humiliating her probably violates several clauses. My attorneys have prepared a detailed analysis." The door burst open again. Ben's mother, Diane, rushed in, face flushed, designer handbag swinging. Security trailed behind apologetically. "Ashley, sweetheart, this is a terrible misunderstanding," Diane began, then stopped when she saw the evidence on screen. "Mrs. David, this is a closed board meeting," Rebecca said coldly. "I'm Ben's mother. I have every right to defend my son." Diane moved toward Ashley like approaching a misbehaving child. "Darling, I know Ben can be thoughtless, but this vendetta is beneath you. Your grandmother would be horrified." Ashley's expression didn't change. "My grandmother left me a letter before she died. She told me to wait until I knew who loved me for myself. She told me powerful women are often surrounded by people who mistake kindness for weakness. She told me when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." "Your grandmother barely knew Ben," Diane protested. "She knew enough. She knew the company only improved after I joined. She knew Ben's lifestyle exceeded his salary. She knew real love doesn't require making yourself smaller." Ashley's voice remained steady. And she knew when the time came, I'd need to remember all of this. Diane's face flushed darker. You spoiled brat. You ungrateful little girl, my son gave you everything. He married you when you were nobody, when you were just some mousy woman in marketing. He made you important. The silence was absolute. Ashley smiled without warmth. Your son married the majority owner of a multi-million-dollar company. He married the granddaughter of the woman who built this empire from nothing. I wasn't nobody, Mrs. David. I was somebody pretending to be nobody, to see if he'd love me anyway. I got my answer. She turned back to the board, dismissing Diane completely. I'm calling for an emergency vote on Ben David's continuation as president. Those in favor of suspending him pending full operational audit, please raise your hands. 8 hands went up immediately. 2 abstained. Theodore hesitated, then slowly raised his hand. 9 votes. Those opposed? Silence. Not even Ben raised his hand. Motion carries. Ashley said quietly, Ben David is suspended, effective immediately. His access to company systems and facilities is revoked. Security will escort him out. This meeting is adjourned. She gathered her materials and walked out without looking at Rebecca, and her team followed, expensive shoes clicking a rhythmic farewell. Ben sat frozen as security approached. His mother was crying, mascara running, still trying to argue with board members who actively avoided her. Margaret paused at the door, finally meeting Ben's eyes. She used to make coffee for everyone on early mornings. Did you know that? Ashley would come in before dawn, make sure the whole pot was fresh, never mentioned it, never took credit. I only found out because I came in early once and saw her. When I thanked her, she asked me not to tell anyone. She shook her head. We all thought you were doing her a favor, letting your wife work here. Turns out she was doing you the favor. Always. The security guard cleared his throat. Mr. David, we need your badge and keys. Ben's hands shook as he removed his security badge. The parking space would be next, the company card, everything that had made him feel important. As they led him past employees who suddenly found their computers fascinating, Ben caught his reflection in the glass wall. He looked exactly the same as that morning when he'd walked in feeling like a king. That was the terrifying part. He looked the same, but everything had fundamentally changed, and he hadn't seen it happening until the ground disappeared beneath his feet. Chapter 3. The Counterstrike. Norman Reese's office smelled like old leather and expensive cigars, designed to make clients feel like power was being brokered in their favor. Ben sat across from the attorney who'd been practicing for 40 years, watching him spread documents across the mahogany desk with the care of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. The good news is you're not completely without options, Norman said. The bad news is your options are limited and potentially catastrophic if we play them wrong. Ben hadn't slept. He'd spent the previous night in a hotel after discovering the penthouse door code had been changed. The humiliation of standing in that hallway with his bags while a neighbor watched still burned. Just tell me how we fight, Ben said. Norman pulled out a specific document, yellow tabs marking multiple sections. Do you remember signing this about 2 years ago? Your wife probably said something about consolidating financial assets or estate planning. The memories surfaced slowly. A Sunday afternoon, Ashley coming home with a folder, talking about simplifying their finances. He'd been watching a game, signed where she indicated without reading, "What is it?" Ben asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. A spousal financial agreement. It gives you limited operational authority over certain trust assets during marital dissolution proceedings, probably presented as protecting you if something happened to her. But this clause here, Norman pointed to page 7, gives you ability to freeze specific accounts and create temporary injunctions on asset transfers. Hope flickered. So I can stop her. Not stop her. Slow her down. Make things complicated enough that she'll want to negotiate. It's leverage, Ben. Limited, but leverage. The problem is using it will get very ugly, very publicly. "I don't care about ugly," Ben said. "She destroyed me in front of the entire board. I want to fight back." Norman studied him. "Ashley Horn comes from serious money, the kind that doesn't just hire good attorneys, it keeps them on retainer for generations. If we activate this clause, she'll respond with everything she has." "Are you prepared?" "Yes," Ben said without hesitation. "File whatever we need, freeze the accounts, make her sweat." What Ben couldn't articulate was that this wasn't about money. It was about the look in Ashley's eyes during that board meeting, that complete absence of recognition. He needed her to acknowledge him, even if that acknowledgement was rage. Norman made the necessary calls. By day's end, injunctions had been filed on 3 major operational accounts. Nothing that would shut down Meridian Global, but enough to create immediate problems. Enough to make Ashley remember he still existed. The media strategy came next. Norman had connections, reporters who owed favors. Suddenly the story shifted from man exposed as fraud to heiress wife's revenge threatens company. The narrative wasn't subtle. Wealthy woman scorned, using money to destroy her hard-working husband who'd helped build her grandmother's legacy into something modern. Ben did 3 interviews in 2 days, each carefully choreographed, earnest, humble, slightly wounded. He talked about loving Ashley despite their differences, about being blindsided by her vindictiveness. He never mentioned Goldie directly, but implied Ashley had always been insecure, jealous, difficult to please. Comment sections filled with people taking sides. Some saw through it, but others bought the narrative. "Rich women are always like this," one wrote. "They think they can buy people and throw them away." Goldie moved into Ben's hotel suite without asking, arriving with 3 suitcases and a smile that suggested she'd won something Ben was too exhausted to argue, and besides, having her there felt like proof he'd made the right choice. "You should do more shows," Goldie said, scrolling her phone. "The narrative is shifting. People are seeing how unreasonable she's being. Who destroys their husband's career over a simple disagreement?" Ben wanted to believe her, but somewhere in his gut, he knew Ashley wasn't the type to care what strangers thought. The temporary injunctions created exactly the chaos Norman predicted. Ashley's team scrambled to access alternative accounts, reroute payments, explain to confused vendors why approved purchases were held up. It wasn't devastating, but it was annoying, and Ben took satisfaction imagining her frustration. 3 board members called within the same hour, their voices sharing the same quality, careful distance masking something colder. "Ben," Theodore said, grandfatherly warmth notably absent. "I've been approached by Ashley's attorneys. They've presented additional documentation that I find very concerning." "What documentation?" "Evidence that the accounts you froze contained payroll for 300 employees wondering if they'll be paid on time. Evidence that you knew exactly what those accounts were for. Evidence that you're willing to harm innocent people to make your ex-wife's life difficult." "That's not what this is about," Ben protested. "I'm protecting my legal rights." "By holding employee paychecks hostage?" Theodore's voice hardened. "That's not protecting rights, Ben. That's vindictiveness. It makes me question every good thing I believed about you." The call ended abruptly. The next call was Margaret, less diplomatic. The third was from a board member explaining that if Ben continued, he'd personally vote to terminate his contract entirely. Norman called that evening with bad news, in measured tones. "She's filed counter-motions that make our injunctions look petty and cruel. She's also released a statement saying any employee affected by frozen accounts will be paid from her personal funds. She'll eat the cost rather than make working people suffer. The optics are terrible for us." So we back down. We strategically retreat. Release the injunctions, but frame it as you being reasonable. The bigger person emphasize you never wanted to hurt employees. It felt like losing, but Ben agreed. The next morning, Ashley's response to his media campaign hit every major business publication simultaneously. Not interviews or statements, just documentation. page after page of time-stamped emails, strategy proposals, client communications, all showing Ashley's work rebranded as Ben's achievements. The evidence was so comprehensive it didn't need commentary. One journalist's headline, "The Man Who Never Had an Original Thought." Another, "When Your Entire Career is Built on Your Wife's Brain." The sympathy Ben had cultivated evaporated in hours. People who'd defended him now felt foolish. His interviews were replayed with new context, his earnest expressions looking like practiced lying. Goldie posted more photos of them together, captions about true love. The photos stopped getting likes and started getting replies, asking if she realized she was dating a man who'd stolen credit from his wife for years. Eventually, she made her account private. Ben sat in the hotel room, phone showing notification after notification of his professional reputation crumbling, and understood with sudden clarity that Ashley had let him make the first move. She'd let him file injunctions, do interviews, play victim, all while holding evidence that would destroy him the moment she released it. She'd given him rope, and he'd hanged himself with it on television. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. David, this is building management for Riverside Towers. Ms. Mann needs to vacate the apartment by week's end. The lease was in Mrs. Horn's name, and she's declined to renew." "What apartment?" "Unit 2847. The one Ms. Mann has been occupying. Mrs. Horn's attorney sent termination notice this morning." The call ended. Ben looked at Goldie, still scrolling obliviously. "Goldie," he said quietly, "where exactly do you live?" She looked up, confusion crossing her face, then understanding, then panic. "It's complicated. We can talk later." But Ben was already pulling up property records. The apartment lease showed Ashley's name. The payments came from an account he'd thought was his personal fund. He'd been paying his girlfriend's rent with his wife's money. For 8 months, and Ashley had known. She'd watched him do it, never said a word, just documented everything with the patience of someone who knew exactly how this story would end. "You knew," he said to Goldie. "You knew that was her money." Goldie stood, defensive. "She has more money than she knows what to do with. Why shouldn't we use it?" "Because it makes me look like exactly what she says I am," Ben shouted. "Because it makes me the villain in every version of this story." "You're only the villain if you let her control the narrative," Goldie shot back. "We need to fight harder." Ben stared at this woman he'd convinced himself he wanted, this woman who'd been living off his wife's generosity while mocking her, and felt something break that had nothing to do with love. He'd thrown away a real partnership for a fantasy, and the fantasy was standing in expensive clothes she'd never paid for, telling him to fight harder while offering nothing but company in his destruction. Norman called again. "Ben, we need to talk about the audit. Ashley's agreed to one, but on specific terms. Independent firm, full access, comparing company performance before and after your marriage. I think we should decline." "Why?" "Because I don't think the results will be favorable. Once those numbers are public, your narrative completely collapses." Ben closed his eyes. "What if I didn't decline?" "Then you're gambling the data will support your version. Is that a gamble you're comfortable making?" The answer was no, but saying no meant admitting defeat. "I'll agree to the audit," he heard himself say. "Let her have her numbers. I'm not hiding from the truth." The lie tasted bitter, but he sold it to himself anyway, the way he'd been selling himself lies for years. Norman sighed the sigh of a man who'd warned his client and been ignored. "I'll notify their team. God help you, Ben." After the call ended, Ben stood at the hotel window, looking down at the city where he'd once felt like a king, and wondered when everything had started falling apart. Was it yesterday? Was it when he'd demanded Ashley apologize to Goldie? Or was it years ago, the first time he'd taken credit for her idea and she'd said nothing, her silence feeling like permission rather than the test it actually was? Behind him, Goldie turned on the television, looking for news coverage, always performing even when the audience had stopped watching. Ben saw his reflection in the window glass and barely recognized himself. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. Ashley's childhood bedroom hadn't changed since she'd left for college. Framed photos from debate team victories still lined the walls, her grandmother's favorite novels still sagged the bookshelf, and the window still overlooked gardens where Eleanor Horne had taught her granddaughter about legacy on warm summer evenings. Now those lessons felt like prophecy. Kira found her at 2 in the morning, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, surrounded by photographs tracking the timeline of her marriage. Ashley had laid them out chronologically, a visual autopsy of how love had curdled into something unrecognizable. "You weren't answering your phone," Kira said quietly, settling beside her best friend. "Your dad's worried. Your brother's threatening to do something dramatically unhelpful, and I'm apparently the only one who knows where you hide when the world gets too heavy." Ashley didn't look up from the photos. "This one was our anniversary dinner. See his face? He's looking at his phone under the table. I told myself he was checking work emails, but the reflection in his wine glass shows a text thread. I can't read it, but I know now it was probably Goldie. I was sitting right there, smiling like an idiot, celebrating a marriage to someone who'd already checked out." Kira picked up another photo, Ashley and Ben at a company event. "You look happy here." "I was happy," Ashley said, voice cracking. "That's what destroys me, Kira. I wasn't delusional. I wasn't imagining our connection. It was real once. I felt it. He made me laugh, made me feel seen, made me believe we were building something together. Then, somewhere along the way, I became invisible. I became furniture in his life story, just another asset he'd acquired and stopped appreciating." She pulled out her phone, opening a folder labeled Evidence. Text message screenshots filled the screen. Conversations between Ben and Goldie going back months. Not explicit, not overtly sexual, but intimate in a way that hurt more than crude messages would have. Inside jokes, late-night confessions, planning for a future that didn't include Ashley, except as an obstacle to manage. "I found these 3 months ago," Ashley whispered. 3 months, Kira. I saw him falling in love with someone else in real time, and I didn't say anything. I kept waiting for him to stop, to remember what we had, to choose me without being forced. I wanted him to choose me. The tears came then, silent and devastating. Kira wrapped her arms around her friend and let her fall apart. "He never loved me," Ashley sobbed, "or he did, but only the version that made him feel important. The second I stopped being convenient, I became disposable. And the worst part is that I knew deep down, I knew, but I loved him enough to give him chances to prove me wrong. And he failed every single one," Kira said softly. "Spectacularly." Ashley pulled back, wiping her eyes. "You know what Goldie said at that charity gala? The one that supposedly caused all this? She cornered me in the bathroom and told me Ben had called her his intellectual equal, that they understood each other on a level I could never reach. She said he was just waiting for the right time to end our marriage, that I was holding him back from his full potential." Kira's expression darkened. "Please tell me you have that recorded." "Better, I have witnesses." 4 women heard the entire conversation. One of them is a family law judge who took detailed notes because she was horrified. Ashley laughed hollowly. "Goldie thinks she's clever, but she's just cruel, and Ben thinks cruel is the same as confident." They sat in silence, the weight of failed promises settling around them. Finally, Kira spoke carefully but firmly. "Ashley, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Is this about getting justice, or is this about hoping that if you hurt him enough, he'll finally realize what he lost?" The question hit like a physical blow. Ashley opened her mouth to deny it, to insist this was purely about protecting her grandmother's legacy and her own dignity. But Kira's eyes held the truth they'd both been avoiding. "I don't know," Ashley admitted. I want to believe I'm doing this because it's right, because he deserves consequences. But there's this part of me, this stupid, hopeful part, that thinks maybe if he sees what he threw away, he'll come back and everything will be okay. Kira finished gently. No, Ashley said, but her voice wavered. I don't want him back. I really don't. But I want him to want to come back. I want him to realize that choosing Goldie was the worst decision of his life. I want him to regret humiliating me in front of 42 people who will never forget. That's fair, Kira said. That's actually very fair. But Ashley, you need to accept that Ben might never have that realization. Narcissists rarely do. He might go to his grave believing he was the victim. Can you live with that? Ashley gathered the photographs, stacking them neatly. I'll have to. Because the alternative is letting him rewrite history entirely, letting everyone believe I was some neglected housewife who couldn't handle him finding happiness. I won't let him erase me twice. Her phone buzzed with a message from her attorney. The independent audit had been approved. Results available within 2 weeks. Attached was a preliminary finding. The frozen accounts would delay payroll for nearly 300 employees unless alternative arrangements were made immediately. He's hurting people who never did anything to him, Ashley said, showing Kira the message. Our receptionist has 2 kids. She can't afford to miss a paycheck because Ben wants to prove a point. So, what are you going to do? Ashley's jaw set. I'm going to pay every single employee from my personal account. I'm going to make sure they all know their paychecks are delayed because of Ben's legal maneuvering, not because the company is in trouble. Then I'm going to ensure every news outlet understands he's willing to harm working families to hurt me. That's going to make him look terrible. Good, Ashley said simply. He should look terrible. He is terrible. I was just too close to see it clearly. Kira picked up one of the earlier photos from Ashley and Ben's wedding day. They looked impossibly young, impossibly hopeful. Do you remember what you told me on your wedding day? You said Ben made you feel like you didn't have to choose between being powerful and being loved. He lied, Ashley said flatly. Or maybe he believed it then and realized powerful women are exhausting to love. They have opinions. They take up space. Goldie makes him feel tall because she's been performing fragility since day one. But she performs the kind of femininity that makes mediocre men feel exceptional. And you refuse to perform. I shouldn't have to perform. Ashley's voice rose. I should be allowed to be competent without it being threatening. I should be allowed to own a company without pretending my husband runs it to protect his ego. My grandmother built an empire and never once apologized for being brilliant. Why should I? You shouldn't, Kira agreed. But Ben needed you to, and when you stopped trying, he found someone who would. The truth settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Ashley had spent 3 years making herself smaller, quieter, less intimidating, calling it compromise. It wasn't compromise, it was erasure. A knock interrupted them. Ashley's father, Julian, stood in the hallway, expression carefully neutral in that way, parents perfect when trying not to say, I told you so. Your brother found Ben's media interviews, Julian said. Trevor wants to release a statement. I told him to wait for your approval. Tell him to hold off, Ashley said, standing and straightening her shoulders. I don't need to respond to Ben's version. I just need to let the truth speak for itself. The audit will show everything. Julian studied his daughter. Your mother wanted me to tell you she's proud of you. She wishes she'd had your courage when she needed it. The implication hung in the air. Ashley's parents' marriage had ended quietly years ago, a mutual acknowledgement that they'd grown into incompatible people. I'm not courageous, Dad, Ashley said quietly. I'm just finally done pretending that making myself smaller is the same as being loved. Julian kissed his daughter's forehead. Courage isn't the absence of fear, sweetheart. It's doing what's right, even when you're terrified. And what you're doing, That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." After he left, Ashley and Kira sat watching dawn break over the gardens. The light changed everything, made the previous night feel distant and survivable. "I loved him," Ashley said finally. "I need you to know this isn't about revenge. I genuinely loved him. And losing that belief is its own kind of death." "I know," Kira said, squeezing her friend's hand. "But you're not dead, Ashley. You're just finally done dying for someone who wouldn't have done the same for you." Ashley picked up her phone and opened email, composing a message to her legal team. Brief, professional, final. "Proceed with all documentation. Release the payroll statement. I'm done playing defense." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then turned off her phone entirely. Whatever came next would come, but for now, Ashley let herself feel the full weight of her grief without trying to weaponize it, without pretending she was fine. She wasn't fine. She was broken and furious and exhausted. But she was also still standing, and that would have to be enough. Chapter 5. The Turning Point. Trevor Hahn's office looked like a war room, which made sense considering he won wars for a living. Political campaigns, corporate reputation management, hostile takeover defenses. He'd built a career on understanding how narratives worked and how to dismantle them with surgical precision. Now all that expertise was focused on destroying his sister's ex-husband. "He plagiarized his undergraduate thesis," Trevor said, spreading documents across his conference table, like a poker player revealing a royal flush. Not just similar phrasing, not accidentally parallel thinking, complete word-for-word theft from an obscure business journal published 3 years before he submitted his supposed original research. Ashley stared at the evidence, feeling simultaneously vindicated and hollowed out. Even Ben's education was a lie. "How did you find this?" she asked. Trevor's smile was sharp. "I have a researcher who specializes in academic verification. Once I knew what to look for, the patterns were obvious. Ben's writing style is competent but unremarkable. His thesis was sophisticated and well-argued. The disconnect was glaring. We pulled the archives, ran text through comparison software, found the original source. Some poor graduate student published brilliant work that went nowhere because the journal had limited circulation. Ben found it, copied it almost verbatim, submitted it as his own." Ashley's legal team sat around the table, expressions ranging from satisfaction to concern. Rebecca Walsh spoke first, voice measured and cautious. "This is explosive," she said. "If we release this, it destroys what's left of Ben's credibility completely. But we need to think strategically about timing. Right now, we're winning public opinion slowly and steadily. If we hit him with this too soon, it might generate sympathy. People don't like piling on." "So when do we use it?" Ashley asked. "After the audit," Trevor said immediately. "Let the numbers prove he contributed nothing operationally, then reveal he contributed nothing intellectually either. It's a 1-2 punch that leaves him nowhere to hide. The audit shows he stole credit from you during marriage. The plagiarism shows he's been stealing credit his entire life. It's not revenge at that point. It's a pattern of behavior." Ashley walked to the window, looking down at the city where Ben was somewhere struggling to maintain his crumbling narrative. Had he always been a fraud, or had success made him into one? "There's something else you need to see," Rebecca said, pulling up emails on her laptop. "We've been monitoring Ben's communications through legal discovery. He's been reaching out to board members, trying to rebuild alliances most aren't responding. But we found something interesting in his conversation with Theodore." She turned the screen. The email chain showed Ben pleading his case, talking about collaborative partnerships. Theodore's response was surprisingly cold. "Ben, I've known your wife's grandmother since before you were born. Eleanor Horn taught me everything I know about integrity in business. She would be disappointed in how you've handled this. I suggest you accept the audit results gracefully and move forward with whatever dignity you have left." Theodore backed away from him completely, Rebecca explained. And when Theodore makes moral judgments, other board members listen. You're not just winning legally, Ashley. You're winning the only currency that matters in these circles. Respect. Ashley's phone buzzed with a news alert. Another publication had run a story about the frozen payroll accounts, featuring interviews with affected employees. The headline read, "Workers Caught in Wealthy Couple's Divorce Drama." But the article made Ben look petty and vindictive, while Ashley was framed as the responsible party protecting her staff. "The narrative is shifting," Trevor observed. "People are starting to understand this isn't about two equally wronged parties. This is about a man who exploited his wife's resources, then threw a tantrum when she stopped allowing it." "Has Ben responded?" Ashley asked. "He released a statement through his attorney about an hour ago," Rebecca said, pulling it up. "Mostly what you'd expect. Claims persecution, says the audit is biased, accuses you of using family wealth to destroy him. But here's the interesting part." She pointed to a specific paragraph. "He's agreeing to the audit publicly. He's calling your bluff, or at least he thinks he is." Ashley read Ben's statement, recognizing the false confidence in every line. He genuinely believed somehow the numbers would support his version, that his contributions would be measurable enough to justify his position. The delusion was almost impressive. "He has no idea," she said quietly. "He actually thinks he built something." "Let him think that," Trevor advised. "Confident people make bigger mistakes. If he'd been defensive, tried to negotiate audit terms, he might have limited damage instead. He's walking into it chin up, which means the fall will be that much more spectacular." The strategy meeting continued for another hour, mapping responses to various scenarios. If the audit showed minimal operational impact, they'd release findings with professional disappointment. If it showed active damage, they'd frame it as fiduciary concern. If it showed exactly what Ashley suspected, that every quarter of growth corresponded to her initiatives, they'd let the numbers speak and watch his narrative collapse under objective data's weight. "There's one more thing," Rebecca said as the meeting wrapped up. "We've been approached by several media outlets wanting your side. Personal interviews, profile pieces, opportunity to control your narrative. What would you like us to tell them?" Ashley considered it. Part of her wanted to do exactly what Ben had done, go on camera and explain her perspective. But something stopped her. Some instinct inherited from her grandmother about the difference between power that announces itself and power that simply exists. "Tell them I'll consider interviews after the audit is complete and facts are established," Ashley said. "I don't need to defend myself against accusations that will be disproven by data. Let Ben exhaust himself explaining why numbers are wrong. I'll wait until they speak for themselves." Trevor nodded approvingly. "Smart. You maintain moral high ground by refusing to engage in he said, she said drama. When you do finally speak, it'll be from a position of verified truth." After everyone left, Ashley sat alone in Trevor's office, surrounded by evidence of her husband's systematic betrayal. The plagiarism was somehow the detail that hurt most, not because it was the worst thing he'd done, but because it revealed Ben had never been the person he'd pretended to be. The confident, self-made man she'd fallen in love with had been a performance from the beginning. Her phone rang. Julian's name appeared. "Your mother wants to know if you're coming home for dinner," he said. "She's making your grandmother's recipe for chicken piccata. She says you need to eat something other than coffee and righteous anger." Despite everything, Ashley smiled. "Tell her I'll be there. She also wants me to tell you that she ran into Diane David at the country club. Apparently Ben's mother has been trying to rally sympathy, claiming you've always been cold and calculated, that you trapped Ben into marriage knowing you'd eventually destroy him. Let me guess, nobody's buying it. Your grandmother's friends are circling the wagons. Apparently, Diane got very publicly told by Patricia Cromwell that anyone who raised a son who steals credit from his wife has no business criticizing anyone else's child rearing. Quite the scene. Diane left early." Ashley felt a surge of affection for her grandmother's generation, those steel magnolias who knew exactly how to deliver devastating social judgments with impeccable politeness. "Dad," Ashley said carefully, "did you know, when you met Ben, did you suspect he wasn't what he seemed?" Julian was quiet. "I knew he was impressed by you for the wrong reasons. He looked at you like you were a prize he'd won, rather than a person he was getting to know. But I also knew saying anything would just make you defensive. You needed to learn this lesson yourself, as painful as that was for me to watch." "I'm sorry I didn't listen." "You have nothing to apologize for," Julian said firmly. "You tried to build something real with someone only capable of building illusions. That's not your failure. That's his. Now come home and eat before your mother drives to Trevor's office and drags you back herself." After hanging up, Ashley gathered her things. As she reached the door, Trevor appeared with one final document. "This just came through," he said. "Early preliminary findings from the audit. They're not supposed to share this yet, but our contact thought you should see it privately before it becomes official." Ashley took the paper, hands steady despite her racing heart. The summary was brief, but devastating. Initial analysis suggests all major revenue growth, strategic initiatives, and client acquisitions during marriage period originated from documented proposals submitted by Ashley Horn. Subject: Ben David's independent contributions appear limited to implementation of existing strategies. Further detailed analysis forthcoming. "He built nothing," Ashley said, the words feeling both victorious and hollow. Everything he claimed, every speech about his vision and leadership, it was all just echoing back ideas I'd handed him. "Now you have proof," Trevor said gently. "Now everyone will have proof. The question is, does that help with the part of you that still wishes he'd been different?" Ashley looked at her brother, seeing the concern beneath his strategic mind. "No, the proof just confirms what I already knew. It doesn't make it hurt less. But maybe that's okay. Maybe I'm allowed to be right and heartbroken at the same time." "You're absolutely allowed," Trevor said. "But Ashley, when this is over, when Ben is completely exposed and everyone knows the truth, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll remember this wasn't about revenge. This was about refusing to let someone erase you. There's a difference, and you need to hold on to that difference, especially when people try to paint you as vindictive." Ashley nodded. "I promise. I'm not trying to destroy him. I'm just refusing to let him destroy me." "Good," Trevor said, "because the next few weeks are going to test that resolve. When the full audit comes out, when the plagiarism becomes public, Ben's going to lash out. He's going to say terrible things, make desperate accusations, try anything to shift blame away from himself. You need to be prepared to weather that storm without losing yourself in it." "I'm ready," Ashley said. "Whatever he throws at me, I'm ready, because I'm not fighting alone anymore. I have you. I have Dad. I have lawyers who believe me, and I have a grandmother's legacy that won't let me quit. Ben has what? Goldie and a hotel room, and a story nobody believes anymore." "Exactly," Trevor said, pulling his sister into a hug. "And that makes all the difference." Chapter 6. The Empire Strikes Back. The conference center ballroom held 200 of the industry's most influential people, all gathered for the annual Business Leadership Summit, where reputations were built and demolished over cocktails and keynote speeches. Ashley stood backstage, listening to the moderator introduce her as the next speaker, and felt the weight of every eye that would soon be on her. Please welcome Ashley Horn, founder and managing director of Ascent Ventures, to discuss building authentic value in a performance-driven world. The applause was polite but curious. Most people in that room knew her as Ben David's wife, the woman currently dismantling her husband in the most public divorce the business community had witnessed in years. Now she was stepping into the spotlight on her own terms, and the anticipation was electric. Ashley walked onto the stage in a deep emerald suit that her grandmother would have loved, her presence commanding without being aggressive. She didn't smile at first. just stood at the podium and let the silence build until it became uncomfortable. "I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you," she began, her voice clear and steady. "For 3 years, I worked at a company where my ideas were systematically rebranded as someone else's achievements. For 3 years, I watched someone take credit for strategies I'd developed, client relationships I'd built, innovations I'd proposed, and for 3 years I said nothing because I believed that real partnership meant supporting your spouse's success even when it meant erasing your own contributions." The room went completely still. This wasn't the speech anyone had expected. I told myself I was being generous. I told myself that marriage meant shared victories, that love meant not keeping score. What I didn't understand until recently was that I wasn't in a partnership. I was in a performance where someone else was the star and I was the stagehand, working invisibly to make their spotlight possible. Ashley paused, letting that sink in. "The question I've been asking myself is this: at what point does supporting someone else's dreams become betraying your own?" She clicked to the next slide, which showed a simple graph with no labels, just 2 lines tracking different trajectories. "This is what happens when you confuse kindness with permission. One person rises while the other disappears, and the person rising rarely notices the person disappearing until they're gone completely." The applause that followed was different now, warmer, more personal. Women in the audience were nodding, recognition flickering across their faces. Ashley saw it and felt something shift inside her, the transformation from wounded wife to someone whose story might actually matter beyond her own pain. She spent 20 minutes talking about building Ascent Ventures, about identifying talented founders who'd been overlooked by traditional funding sources, about creating opportunities for people who'd been told they weren't enough. She never mentioned Ben by name, but the subtext was crystal clear. She was building something real while he scrambled to maintain his house of cards. After the speech, Ashley was surrounded by people wanting to talk, to share their own stories of being erased or underestimated, to ask about investment opportunities or mentorship. The energy was intoxicating, proof that she could exist independent of Ben's shadow, that her voice carried weight when she finally chose to use it. "That was magnificent," a woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Jennifer Calloway. I run the Women's Initiative at Horizon Capital. We should talk about collaboration." Ashley shook her hand, recognizing the name Jennifer was legendary in venture capital circles, known for backing female founders when no one else would. "I'd love that. Have your assistant reach out to mine and we'll set something up." As she made her way through the crowd, Ashley's phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. "Ben just saw video of your speech. He's calling everyone he knows, trying to do damage control. You rattled him." Good, Ashley thought. Let him feel what it's like to be on the losing side of a narrative for once. The real surprise came 2 days later when Ashley's assistant forwarded an email that made her pause mid-sip of her morning coffee. 3 senior executives from Meridian Global were requesting a meeting, not to discuss the divorce or the audit, but to discuss joining Ascent Ventures. They were jumping ship, and they were doing it loudly enough that everyone would notice. Rebecca called within the hour. "Have you seen the resignation letters? They're citing a desire to work in an environment that values authentic contribution over performative leadership. That's a direct shot at Ben." "I didn't ask them to leave," Ashley said, though she couldn't deny the satisfaction thrumming through her veins. "I haven't even spoken to them since the board meeting." "You didn't have to ask. Your speech went viral in business circles. People are reassessing everything they thought they knew about Meridian Global's success story, and when executives see an opportunity to align themselves with the actual talent instead of the person who took credit, they move fast." Ashley met with the 3 executives that afternoon in a private dining room. They were cautious at first, clearly worried she might hold their previous silence against them. But Ashley had learned something from her grandmother. The best revenge wasn't destroying people. It was building something so successful that destroying you became impossible. "I'm not interested in rehashing the past," Ashley told them. "What I'm interested in is whether you're ready to work somewhere that values substance over appearance, because I'm building something different here. No ego plays, no credit theft, no making yourself look good at someone else's expense. Just real work that produces real results." Timothy from accounts, who'd looked so ashamed during that board meeting, spoke first. "We should have said something earlier. We knew what was happening, and we stayed silent because it was easier than confronting him. That was cowardice, and we're not proud of it." "The past is done," Ashley said simply. "The question is what you do next. Are you coming to Ascent because you think it'll look good on your resume, or because you actually want to be part of something authentic?" They assured her it was the latter, and Ashley chose to believe them. By week's end, all three had given formal notice to Meridian Global, and the business press was having a field day analyzing what it meant that Ben was hemorrhaging his top talent. Ben's response was predictable but spectacular. He went on another podcast, this time dropping the humble act entirely and going straight for wounded anger. "My wife is systematically destroying the company her grandmother built," he said, voice tight with barely controlled rage. "She's poaching employees, spreading lies about my contributions, using her family money to wage a personal vendetta. This isn't about justice. This is about a woman who can't handle being left." The host, sensing good content, pushed harder. "But the audit results are coming out next week. If those numbers show what your wife's team claims, doesn't that validate her position?" "The audit is biased," Ben shot back. "She's paid for the results she wants. Anyone with money can buy any narrative they want. That's what this whole thing proves." The interview went viral for all the wrong reasons. Comment sections filled with people pointing out that independent audits were, by definition, not biased. Others noted that Ben's claims about Ashley paying for results didn't make sense when the auditing firm's reputation depended on accuracy. A few people even posted screenshots of Ben's old interviews where he'd praised the same firm as the gold standard of financial analysis. Goldie, sensing the tide turning against them, did something catastrophically stupid. She posted a long social media thread about gold diggers who marry for money, then cry victim when their husbands find real love. She included thinly veiled references to Ashley being a trust fund baby who never worked for anything, and Ben being a self-made man who earned everything through talent and dedication. The responses were brutal. People pulled up Goldie's own history of dating men based on their financial status, posted screenshots of her bragging about expensive gifts and trips, and pointed out that she was currently living off Ben's money, which was actually Ashley's money, which made her exactly the gold digger she was accusing others of being. Within 6 hours, Goldie deleted everything and made her account private again, but the screenshots had already spread, and the damage was done. Ashley watched all of this unfold from her office, feeling strangely detached from the circus. This was what happened when you stopped trying to control the narrative and just let the truth breathe. People were smart enough to see through desperation when it presented itself so obviously. "Your mother called," her assistant said, poking her head into the office. "She wants to remind you about dinner tonight. Something about not letting work consume you entirely, and also she made your favorite dessert." Ashley smiled, the kind of genuine smile that had been absent from her face for months during the marriage. "Tell her I'll be there at 7. That evening, sitting around her parents' table with Trevor and Kira and her mother's famous tiramisu, Ashley felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of people who saw her clearly and loved what they saw. "The audit results come out in 3 days, Trevor said, scraping the last of his dessert from his plate. "Are you ready for whatever happens next?" "I'm ready for the truth to be public," Ashley said. After that, whatever Ben does with it is his problem, not mine." Her father raised his glass. "Two women who refuse to disappear." They all raised their glasses, and Ashley felt the weight of her grandmother's expectations settling on her shoulders like a blessing instead of a burden. She was becoming the woman Eleanor Horne had always known she could be, and she was doing it by refusing to stay small for people who couldn't see her clearly. The next morning brought news that made the upcoming audit almost anticlimactic. The university where Ben had gotten his degree quietly announced a review of thesis submissions from his graduating class due to concerns about academic integrity. They didn't name Ben specifically, but everyone knew exactly who they were talking about. Ben's attorney called Rebecca in a panic, asking if there was any way to settle everything quietly before more damage was done. The answer was a simple, elegant no. Ashley had tried quiet for 3 years. Now it was time to be deafening. Chapter 7. The Desperate Alliance. The hotel bar was dim enough to hide desperation, which was probably why Ben and Goldie chose it for their strategy session. They sat in a corner booth, surrounded by empty cocktail glasses and the wreckage of their rapidly disintegrating plans. "We need something bigger," Goldie said, her voice carrying an edge that Ben was starting to recognize as panic masquerading as determination, something that shifts the entire conversation. "Right now, everyone's just waiting for the audit to bury you. We need to bury her first." Ben rubbed his face, exhaustion making his thoughts muddy. He hadn't slept properly in days, his dreams filled with board meetings and his grandmother-in-law's disappointed face. "What are you suggesting?" Goldie leaned forward, and there was something calculating in her expression that should have warned him. "I still have access to some of the old files, not company files, but client lists, strategy documents, things you had on your laptop before they revoked your access. What if we approached Meridian's biggest competitor, offered them information that could give them an edge?" Ben's stomach turned. "That's corporate espionage. That's actually illegal." "Only if you get caught," Goldie said, waving away his concern like it was a minor detail. "And we won't get caught because we're not stealing anything. You're just sharing knowledge you acquired during your tenure. Happens all the time in business transitions." "This isn't a business transition. This is theft." Even as Ben said it, he felt the words losing their weight. He'd already stolen credit for 3 years. What was one more theft in the grand scheme of things? Goldie's hand found his across the table, her fingers cold. "Ben, listen to me. Ashley is destroying you systematically. She's taking everything, your reputation, your career, your dignity. Are you really going to just let her do that without fighting back? Are you going to let her win?" The word win triggered something in Ben, some deep-seated fear of being the loser in a story everyone would remember. He thought about Ashley on that stage giving her speech, thought about the executives abandoning ship, thought about his mother crying in the country club bathroom because her friends wouldn't return her calls. "Who would we approach?" he heard himself ask. Goldie's smile was sharp and triumphant. "I already made some inquiries. Callister Industries has been trying to poach Meridian's clients for years. Their CEO would pay serious money for the right information." What Ben didn't know, what Goldie definitely didn't know, was that Callister Industries' CEO was a longtime friend of Eleanor Horne's. They'd started their companies the same year, had supported each other through decades of business battles, and had maintained a friendship based on mutual respect for integrity. The meeting was set up for the following week. Ben and Goldie prepared their presentation like it was a legitimate business proposal, complete with client relationship maps, strategic vulnerabilities, and proprietary methodology that Ashley had developed and Ben had rebranded as his own over the years. They met in a private conference room at Callister's offices, both dressed like they were about to close a major deal rather than commit corporate betrayal. The CEO, Richard Callister, greeted them warmly, offered coffee, and settled into his chair with the expression of someone about to hear something fascinating. "So," Richard said, "I understand you have information that might be valuable to us regarding Meridian Global's operations." Ben launched into his pitch, outlining client relationships and strategic approaches, framing everything as insights he'd gained through his leadership position. Goldie chimed in occasionally, adding details about key personnel and internal politics. They were smooth, practiced, desperate. Richard took notes, asked clarifying questions, seemed genuinely interested. What Ben didn't notice was the small recording device sitting openly on the table, or the way Richard's assistant kept precise timestamps of every claim they made. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. At the end, Richard shook both their hands and promised to review the information carefully and get back to them with a proposal. "That went well," Goldie said in the car afterward, practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you see how interested he was? We're going to get paid, Ben. Real money. Enough to fight Ashley on her level." Ben wanted to feel victorious, but something nagged at him, some instinct that they'd just made a catastrophic mistake. He pushed the feeling down, telling himself it was just nerves, just the discomfort of doing something ethically questionable. Winners had to be willing to bend rules sometimes, didn't they? Richard Callister called Ashley's attorney that evening. "Rebecca, it's Richard. I need to send you something, and I need you to understand that this stays between us for now. I don't want to show my hand until you're ready to use it legally." The recording and documentation arrived within the hour. Rebecca listened to the entire thing twice, her expression growing more severe with each replay. Then she called Ashley. "We have them," Rebecca said without preamble. "Corporate espionage, attempting to sell proprietary information, violation of fiduciary duty. It's all recorded, it's all documented, and it's absolutely devastating." Richard Callister played them perfectly. Ashley felt something cold settle in her chest. "He tried to sell my company's information. He tried to sell your strategies specifically, the ones you created that he took credit for. He's now attempting to profit from them a second time by selling them to your grandmother's oldest friend." Rebecca's voice was tight with controlled anger. "This isn't just betrayal, Ashley. This is criminal stupidity." Ashley thought about the man she'd married, trying to reconcile him with someone who would do this. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe she'd never actually known the real Ben at all, just the performance he'd given her. "What are our options?" Ashley asked. "We could have them arrested. The evidence is ironclad. Or we could use this as leverage, wait for the audit to come out, then release this information to show a pattern of systematic dishonesty and theft. Legally, both paths are viable. Strategically, the second option destroys him more completely." Ashley closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. This was the moment where she could choose mercy or choose justice, and she wasn't sure anymore if those were different things or the same thing wearing different masks. "Hold the evidence," she said finally. "Let the audit speak first. If he accepts the results gracefully, if he shows even a shred of accountability, then we keep this private. But if he continues lying, if he keeps trying to destroy me and the company, then we show everyone exactly what he's willing to do." "That's more generous than he deserves," Rebecca observed. "It's not about what he deserves. It's about who I want to be when this is over." Ashley took a breath. "My grandmother used to say that you should always give people enough rope to either climb to safety or hang themselves. Ben's had plenty of rope. How he uses it is his choice." The audit results were released on a Tuesday morning. Ashley received the final report first as majority shareholder and read through it in her office with Trevor and Rebecca present. The data was even more damning than the preliminary findings had suggested. During Ben's time as bachelor running operations, the company had achieved modest growth averaging 3% annually. During their marriage, after Ashley joined and began contributing strategies, growth had averaged 18% annually. Every single major client acquisition corresponded directly to documented proposals Ashley had submitted. Every successful pivot or expansion could be traced back to her strategic recommendations. Ben's independent contributions consisted of approving her ideas and presenting them as collaborative efforts, which gradually became presenting them as his ideas, which ultimately became presenting them as his ideas, while actively undermining her credibility. The report concluded, "Subject Ben David's role appears to have been primarily administrative implementation of strategies developed by Ashley Horn. His independent strategic contributions during the marriage period were minimal and, where measurable, produced results consistent with pre-marriage baseline performance." They're saying he was a moderately competent middle manager pretending to be a visionary CEO, Trevor summarized. This is about as damning as audit language gets. The report went to all board members simultaneously at noon. By 1 o'clock, Ben's attorney was calling Rebecca, asking for an emergency meeting. By 2 o'clock, 3 business publications had gotten advance copies and were preparing explosive headlines. By 3 o'clock, Ben's phone had been disconnected because he couldn't pay the bill. Ashley watched it all unfold from her office, feeling strangely empty. This should have felt like victory, but it just felt like the inevitable conclusion of a tragedy that had been written years ago. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Ashley, please, we need to talk." Ben's voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all the confidence and bravado. "The audit is wrong. The methodology is flawed. You have to know that's not the whole story." "Ben," Ashley said quietly, "the audit is a comprehensive independent analysis by the most respected firm in the industry. The methodology is sound. The story is complete. The only question left is whether you're going to accept reality or keep living in your delusion." "I'm not delusional," he insisted, but his voice cracked. "I contributed. I worked hard. I built relationships. I managed teams. I made decisions every single day. That has to count for something." "It does count. You were a perfectly adequate operations manager. The problem was, you weren't satisfied being adequate. You needed to be exceptional, and when you realized you weren't, you borrowed my exceptionalism and pretended it was yours." Ashley's voice was steady, neither angry nor kind. "The tragedy, Ben, is that if you'd just been honest about who you were, if you'd been content being the person you actually were, instead of pretending to be someone you weren't, we might have built something real. But you couldn't stand being ordinary, so you stole extraordinary and called it partnership." Silence on the other end, heavy with everything unsaid. "I loved you," Ben whispered finally. "I really did love you." "You loved what I could give you," Ashley corrected gently. "My connections, my ideas, my money, my silence. You never loved me, Ben. You loved the version of yourself you could pretend to be when I was standing next to you making you look good." She hung up before he could respond, before his denials could weaken her resolve. The truth had been spoken, and there was nothing left to say. By evening, Ben's attorney had released a statement accepting the audit results while claiming they lacked important context and suggesting Ben had been unfairly diminished by reductive analysis. It was the kind of non-apology that admitted nothing while trying to sound reasonable. Ashley didn't bother responding. She didn't need to. The numbers spoke clearly enough that no amount of spin could change their fundamental message. Ben David had built his entire career on his wife's intelligence, and when she'd stopped allowing it, he'd had nothing left to offer. The question now was whether he'd accept that truth or continue his desperate flailing. Ashley suspected she already knew the answer, and she was right. 2 days later, Rebecca called with an edge in her voice that meant bad news. Ben and Goldie met with a reporter. They're planning a tell-all interview claiming you manipulated the audit, used your family money to buy the results, and destroyed his career out of jealousy that he'd found real love with Goldie. Ashley closed her eyes. "He's not going to stop, is he?" "No," Rebecca said simply, "which means it's time to release the recording of his attempted corporate espionage. We've given him every chance to walk away with dignity. He's chosen spectacle instead. Now he gets to learn what happens when you force someone's hand." Ashley thought about her grandmother's letter, about the woman Eleanor Horne had warned her to become strong enough to walk away, but strong enough to finish what needed finishing when walking away wasn't enough. "Release it," Ashley said. "All of it. The recording, the documentation, everything. Let everyone see exactly what he's willing to do when he's losing. Let him explain to that reporter why he was trying to sell my company's secrets while claiming I'm the vindictive one." "Are you sure?" Rebecca asked. "Once we do this, there's no coming back from it. This is nuclear." "I'm sure," Ashley said. "I'm done playing defense. He wants to go to war. Then let's show him what war actually looks like when you're fighting someone who has the weapons and the will to use them." The recording went live that evening, posted to every business news platform simultaneously. The audio of Ben and Goldie pitching stolen information to Richard Callister, complete with their own voices incriminating themselves repeatedly, was damning in a way that no amount of spin could salvage. By morning, Ben David wasn't just a man who'd taken credit for his wife's work. He was a criminal who'd attempted corporate espionage. And everyone who'd given him the benefit of the doubt, who'd considered his side of the story, who'd wondered if maybe Ashley was being too harsh, suddenly understood exactly who they'd been defending. Chapter 8. The Systematic Dismantling. The police didn't arrest Ben, though Ashley suspected Rebecca had pulled strings to avoid that particular spectacle. Instead, he received a visit from federal investigators asking very pointed questions about the Callister meeting and whether he understood the legal ramifications of attempting to sell proprietary corporate information. Ben's attorney advised him to refuse all media appearances, which meant the tell-all interview never happened. Goldie, sensing the ship was finally sinking beyond any hope of rescue, packed her belongings and disappeared back to wherever she'd come from before inserting herself into Ben's life. She left behind a note that read, "I can't be with someone who has nothing to offer," which was the most honest thing she'd ever said. Ashley watched the systematic collapse from a distance, feeling neither satisfaction nor guilt. She was simply watching consequences unfold in real time, cause and effect playing out with mathematical precision. The university completed their review of Ben's thesis and quietly revoked his degree, citing academic dishonesty that undermines the integrity of our institution. They offered him the opportunity to resubmit original work, which everyone knew he'd never do because everyone now knew he couldn't. Professional organizations began removing him from their membership rolls. The business magazine that had profiled him as a rising star ran a follow-up piece titled "The Emperor's New Resume: When Success is Built on Someone Else's Foundation." Industry conferences uninvited him from speaking panels. LinkedIn endorsements disappeared overnight as people quietly deleted their recommendations. Ben's sister Natalie gave an interview to a society magazine that ran under the headline, "When Family Members Disappoint, a Sister's Perspective on Public Failure." She was diplomatic but clear. Sometimes people are given incredible opportunities and they squander them through arrogance. That's not anyone's fault but their own. I love my brother, but I can't defend his choices. Even Diane, Ben's mother, who'd been so vocal in his defense, went conspicuously silent. Rumors circulated that she'd been essentially exiled from her social circles, that Eleanor Horne's old friends had made it clear that defending Ben meant choosing sides against a woman they'd loved and respected for decades. Diane had chosen social survival over maternal loyalty, which probably hurt Ben more than any audit. Meanwhile, Ashley's ventures continued flourishing. Ascent had 3 successful exits in as many months. She was profiled in major publications as an example of someone who'd turned personal adversity into professional triumph. Speaking invitations poured in faster than she could accept them. "You're becoming a brand," Trevor observed over lunch at their favorite restaurant. "The woman who refused to be erased. That's powerful, and people want to be associated with power." I don't want to be a brand, Ashley said, pushing her salad around her plate. I just wanted Ben to stop lying about who built what. Now it feels like I've become this symbol of something larger, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that weight. You don't get to control what you symbolize to other people, Trevor said. You just get to control whether you use that platform responsibly, and from what I've seen, you're doing fine. Patricia Cromwell, her grandmother's bridge partner and the retired federal judge, invited Ashley to tea at the country club. They sat on the veranda overlooking perfectly manicured gardens, and Patricia studied Ashley with eyes that had evaluated thousands of defendants over a long career. Your grandmother would be proud of you, Patricia said finally. Not because you destroyed Ben, though he certainly earned his destruction, but because you remembered who you were when someone tried to make you forget. Eleanor always worried you'd inherited your mother's tendency to disappear into other people's expectations. She's probably relieved to see she was wrong. I almost did disappear, Ashley admitted. If Ben hadn't pushed so far, if he'd been content with private betrayal instead of public humiliation, I might have stayed indefinitely. I kept thinking love meant sacrifice, kept confusing erasure with compromise. Most women do, Patricia said. We're trained to. Your grandmother spent her whole life fighting that training, and it made her formidable but lonely. She hoped you'd find a way to be powerful without being lonely. Did you? Ashley thought about her office, her team, her family rallying around her, her growing network of women who understood exactly what she'd been through. I'm not lonely. Heartbroken, maybe. Angry, definitely, but not lonely. Good, Patricia said, because the next phase is going to test whether you can build something lasting or whether this was all just reaction to trauma. Revenge is easy. Creation is hard. Your grandmother knew that, which is why she built an empire instead of just destroying her enemies. The wisdom settled over Ashley like a challenge she hadn't fully considered. What came after the destruction? Who was she when she wasn't fighting Ben anymore? She got part of her answer a week later when a young woman approached her after another keynote speech. The woman was nervous, clutching her portfolio like a shield, clearly working up courage to speak. Ms. Horn, I'm sorry to bother you, but I have a business proposal. I know you probably get 1 million of these, and you're probably tired, but I've been working on this technology for 3 years, and I think it could actually change things. And I just need someone to believe in it enough to give me a chance. And I saw your speech about not letting other people erase you, and I thought maybe you'd understand what it's like when everyone tells you your ideas aren't good enough, but you know they're wrong. You know you're onto something, and I just need... Ashley held up a hand gently. Breathe, then tell me about your technology in 1 sentence. The woman breathed. I've developed a platform that helps companies identify and credit intellectual contributions accurately, so people like you don't have to spend years watching someone else take credit for their work. Ashley felt something click into place. The universe answering a question she hadn't known how to ask. That's brilliant. How developed is it? I have a working prototype. I just need funding to scale it and bring it to market. But every investor I've talked to says the market isn't big enough, says companies won't pay to track who contributes what because it's too complicated or too political or threatens existing power structures. Those investors are idiots, Ashley said flatly. How much do you need? They spent 2 hours in a coffee shop, Ashley asking questions while the young woman, her name was Priya, explained the technology with the kind of passion that only comes from solving a problem you've personally experienced. By the end, Ashley had committed initial funding and introduced Priya to 3 other founders in her network who could help with development. Why are you doing this? Priya asked, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden support. You don't know me. My track record isn't impressive. I'm nobody. You're not nobody, Ashley said firmly. You're someone with a solution to a problem that destroys careers and relationships every single day. And I'm doing this because someone should have done it for me 3 years ago. And since they didn't, I'm going to do it for everyone who comes after. That became her mission, the answer to Patricia's challenge about what came after destruction, Ashley built an ecosystem supporting founders who'd been overlooked, underestimated, or erased. She created a fund specifically for women and minorities in tech. She started a mentorship program pairing experienced executives with young professionals who needed someone to actually see them. And somewhere in building all of that, Ashley stopped thinking about Ben entirely. Not because she'd forgiven him, but because he'd become irrelevant to her story. He was the chapter that taught her who she was. But he wasn't the plot anymore. She was. The final legal papers came through on a cold morning. The divorce was finalized. Ben got nothing because he'd brought nothing, and the prenup had been ironclad. Ashley kept the company, the properties, the life they'd built with her money and her labor. She didn't celebrate. She just signed the papers, filed them away, and went back to work. That evening, Kira came over with wine and takeout, and they sat on Ashley's balcony, watching the city lights flicker on as darkness settled. "How does it feel?" Kira asked. "Being officially free?" Ashley considered the question. "It feels like closing a book I shouldn't have opened in the first place, but also like, I'm glad I read it because now I know how those stories end, and I won't make that mistake again." "Are you going to date again, eventually?" "Maybe," Ashley said, "when I meet someone who sees me clearly from the beginning. Someone who doesn't need me to be smaller or quieter or less than I am. Someone who thinks my power is attractive instead of threatening." "Those men exist," Kira assured her. "They're rare, but they exist." "Then I can afford to wait," Ashley said. "I've spent enough time settling for less than I deserve. Whatever comes next, it's going to be on my terms, built on truth instead of performance, or it's not going to be at all." They clinked their wine glasses, toasting to futures that felt possible again, now that the past had finally been put to rest. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. Ben lived in a studio apartment his mother paid for, which came with the humiliating condition that he give her a monthly accounting of every penny spent she'd made. It clear this was temporary, that she expected him to find work and rebuild his life, but the job market had other ideas about Ben David's employability. His resume, once impressive, now looked like a catalogue of fraud. Potential employers would Google his name and find the audit results, the plagiarism scandal, the attempted corporate espionage. Some didn't bother responding to applications. Others called him in for interviews that felt more like interrogations. "So," one interviewer said, barely hiding contempt, "tell me about your strategic contributions at Meridian Global." Ben had learned there was no good answer. If he claimed significant contributions, they'd reference the audit, calling him a liar. If he admitted minimal contributions, they'd ask why they should hire someone who'd added minimal value to his previous employer. The trap was perfect, designed by his own choices, and there was no escape. He finally found work at a mid-sized firm that specialized in helping failing companies restructure. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Ben. His title was Associate Consultant, which was corporate speak for, "We need bodies, and you're qualified enough to fill a chair." The salary was less than half what he'd made at Meridian, and his new boss was younger than him and didn't hide his skepticism about Ben's supposed expertise. "Just follow the established protocols," his boss said during orientation. "Don't improvise, don't try to be innovative, just do what we tell you to do. Think you can handle that?" Ben nodded, swallowing his pride because he had no other option. This was his life now, taking orders from people who knew he'd been exposed as a fraud, working alongside colleagues who'd seen the recordings and read the headlines. He saw Ashley on his phone constantly, unable to stop himself from following her success. New investments, new partnerships, magazine profiles, speaking engagements. She'd become exactly what she'd always been capable of becoming, and it had taken his removal from her life to let that capability flourish. The jealousy was corrosive, eating away at whatever self-respect he had left. Ben told himself she'd gotten lucky, that she'd only succeeded because she'd destroyed him first, that none of this would have happened if she'd just accepted the way things were. But late at night, alone in his studio apartment with its cheap furniture and broken air conditioning, he couldn't quite make himself believe the lies anymore. Goldie resurfaced briefly, calling from another state where she'd apparently moved to escape her own destroyed reputation. "I saw your mom's cutting you off soon," she said without preamble. "I thought maybe we could help each other, pool resources, figure out a comeback strategy." "What resources?" Ben asked bitterly. "You're broke, I'm broke, and neither of us has any credibility left. What exactly are we pooling?" "We could write a book," Goldie suggested. "Tell our side of the story. How Ashley manipulated us, used her family money to destroy us, weaponized her privilege against regular people just trying to build lives." "Nobody would buy that book except people looking to hate read it," Ben said. "And even if they did, you think I want to make money rehashing the worst period of my life? You think I want to keep being defined by this disaster forever?" Goldie was quiet for a moment. "So what then? You're just giving up? Letting her win completely?" "She already won," Ben said, the admission tasting like ash. "She won when I took credit for her first idea, and she said nothing. She won when I brought you into our marriage, and she stayed quiet. She won every single time I mistook her kindness for permission and her silence for approval. The public stuff, the audit, the exposure, that's not her winning. That's just everyone else finally seeing what she already knew." "That's pathetic," Goldie spat. "You're pathetic." "Yeah," Ben agreed tiredly. "I am. But at least I'm finally honest about it." She hung up without saying goodbye, and Ben blocked her number because he didn't need that particular reminder of his failures calling him anymore. His therapist, mandated by his mother as a condition of continued financial support, had a different perspective on things. Dr. Morrison was in his 60s, had probably seen every variety of human dysfunction, and didn't seem impressed by Ben's attempts at self-pity. "You keep framing this as something that happened to you," Dr. Morrison observed during one session. "But the evidence suggests you were an active participant in your own destruction. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about why you needed to take credit for your wife's work instead of being content with your actual contributions." "Because my actual contributions weren't enough," Ben said, the truth spilling out before he could stop it. "Because I looked at what Ashley could do so effortlessly, the way her mind worked, the way clients responded to her ideas, and I knew I'd never be that good, and it was easier to pretend I was that good than to accept being ordinary." "So you stole extraordinary instead of earning it," Dr. Morrison said without judgment, just stating facts. "Yes. And when she discovered the theft, when she stopped allowing it, you blamed her, rather than examining why you felt entitled to steal in the first place." "Yes," Ben whispered. "That's called narcissistic injury," Dr. Morrison explained. "When someone's self-image is based on external validation rather than internal worth, any threat to that validation feels like an attack. You weren't angry that Ashley exposed the truth. You were angry that the truth was being exposed at all, because it forced you to confront the gap between who you pretended to be and who you actually were." Ben sat with that for a long moment. "So what now? How do I fix this?" "You don't fix it," Dr. Morrison said. "You accept it. You accept that you were dishonest, that you hurt someone who loved you, that you destroyed trust that can't be rebuilt. You accept the consequences without expecting redemption or forgiveness. And then you decide who you're going to be moving forward, knowing that person has to be built on truth instead of performance." It sounded impossible. It sounded like a lifetime of work with no guarantee of success. But Ben was finally out of other options. He started small. He wrote an email to Timothy, Margaret, and the other executives who'd left Meridian for Ashley's venture. He didn't send it for weeks, kept revising it, kept trying to find the right words. Finally, he just wrote the truth. "I'm sorry I made you complicit in my dishonesty. You deserved better leadership. Ashley deserved better partnership. I have no excuse except that I was too cowardly to admit I wasn't as talented as I needed to be, and I made everyone around me pay for that cowardice. Timothy was the only one who responded. I appreciate the apology. I can't speak for the others, but I accept it. What you did was wrong, but what we did by staying silent was also wrong. I hope you find a way forward that doesn't require stepping on other people. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, and Ben realized that might be all he deserved. He stopped following Ashley's career, deleted the alerts, unfollowed the publications, removed the temptation to compare her success to his failure. It was like quitting an addiction, the constant need to know what she was doing and whether she was thinking about him. Probably she wasn't thinking about him at all, had moved on completely, and that was both freeing and devastating. His mother came over for dinner one evening, her first visit to his studio apartment since he'd moved in. She looked around at the cheap furniture, the bare walls, the obvious step down from the life he'd been living. Your father called, Diane said without preamble. He wants to know if you'd be willing to meet with him. Ben's father had left when Ben was young, had started a new family, and essentially forgotten his first one existed. Why would I want to meet with him? Because apparently he went through something similar when he was younger. Built a career on lies, got caught, lost everything. He says he wants to tell you what he learned from it, how he rebuilt afterward. Diane's voice was careful, neutral. I'm not saying you have to, but maybe it would help to talk to someone who understands. Ben met his father the following week at a diner. Neither of them had any history with the older man, looked tired, worn down by years of consequences, but there was something solid about him that Ben hadn't expected. I heard what happened, his father said after they'd ordered. Read about it online, saw the recordings. I'm not going to lie to you and say it'll get better quickly. It won't. You destroyed trust, and trust takes years to rebuild if you can rebuild it at all. Then why am I here? Ben asked. To hear that my life is permanently ruined? No. You're here to hear that you have a choice about what comes next. You can spend the rest of your life blaming Ashley, blaming Goldie, blaming circumstances, and stay miserable and bitter. Or you can accept that you screwed up, learn from it, and slowly build something real. It won't be what you had before. It'll probably be smaller, quieter, less impressive. But it'll be yours, and it'll be honest, and that has to be enough. What if it's not enough? Ben asked. What if I can't stand being ordinary? His father smiled sadly. Then you'll be miserable forever, because ordinary is what most of us are. The question is whether you can find peace with that, or whether you'll keep chasing an extraordinary you're not actually equipped to maintain. The conversation didn't fix anything, but it planted something, some seed of possibility that maybe there was a version of his life that didn't involve constant comparison and desperate grasping for validation. Ben started therapy in earnest, stopped just going through the motions. He got a second job on weekends to save money, started paying his own rent so his mother didn't have that power over him. He deleted all his social media accounts, removing the temptation to perform for an audience that had stopped caring. And very, very slowly, in moments so small they barely registered, Ben started becoming someone who didn't need to steal other people's worth to feel valuable. He'd never be extraordinary. He'd probably never be particularly successful. But maybe eventually he could be honest. And maybe that would have to be enough. The divorce papers sat in a drawer in his apartment, a physical reminder of everything he'd destroyed. Sometimes he'd take them out and read through them, seeing Ashley's signature next to his, proof that what they'd had was officially over. He'd loved her, in his way. He'd just loved what she could give him more than he'd loved who she actually was. And by the time he'd understood the difference, it was far too late to do anything except accept the consequences and try not to make the same mistake again. Chapter 10. The Woman They Never Knew. 6 months after the divorce finalized, Ashley stood in the glass-walled office overlooking the city and felt something she hadn't expected. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the absence of that constant low-grade anxiety that had followed her through 3 years of marriage, like a shadow she couldn't shake. The annual Horn Foundation Gala was tonight, and preparations had been consuming everyone's time for weeks. Ashley's team had put together something special this year, a celebration not just of her grandmother's legacy, but of all the women who'd been building quiet empires while men took loud credit. "Your dress arrived," her assistant called from the doorway. "Also, your father wants to know if you've prepared remarks, and Trevor says to remind you to actually eat something before the event, because last year you fainted and he doesn't want a repeat." Ashley smiled. "I didn't faint. I got momentarily lightheaded. You collapsed into Patricia Cromwell's arms, and she had to hold you up while someone brought water. Trevor's still traumatized. Tell Trevor I'll eat a protein bar. Tell Dad my remarks are ready, and thank you for everything you've done to make tonight work." The assistant smiled, genuine warmth replacing professional politeness. "This is the good work, Ms. Horn, the work that actually matters. We're all grateful to be part of it." After she left, Ashley pulled out her grandmother's letter, the one Eleanor had left to be opened after her death. She'd read it so many times the paper was soft, edges worn from handling, but the words still struck with original force. "By the time you read this, you'll know what I meant about waiting. Power isn't about controlling others, sweetheart. It's about refusing to be controlled. Build your empire on truth, love people who see you clearly, and never apologize for being extraordinary. The right person will celebrate your strength instead of fearing it. Everyone else is just practice." Ashley had thought Ben was the right person. She'd been wrong. But the practice had taught her exactly what to look for whenever she was ready to try again. The gala that evening was magnificent. The ballroom filled with 500 people who represented every sector of business, philanthropy, and social change. Ashley had invited entrepreneurs she'd funded, executives she'd mentored, and women who'd shared their own stories of being erased and fighting back. When it was time for her speech, Ashley stood at the podium, in a gown the color of midnight, her grandmother's diamond necklace at her throat, and looked out at faces that represented possibility instead of limitation. "My grandmother built Meridian Global from a single office and a vision that women could lead companies as effectively as men if given the chance. She faced discrimination, mockery, and systematic attempts to undermine her credibility. She succeeded anyway, not by becoming more like the men who doubted her, but by being undeniably excellent at what she did." Ashley paused, letting that settle. "When she died, she left me everything with one instruction: know your worth, and never let anyone convince you to accept less than you deserve." For a while, I forgot that instruction. I made myself smaller to fit someone else's expectations. I erased my own contributions to support someone else's ego. I confused love with self-sacrifice and partnership with erasure. The room was completely silent, everyone understanding they were witnessing something real instead of rehearsed. But my grandmother was smart. She knew that sometimes the best lessons come from our mistakes. She knew that discovering who we are often requires first discovering who we're not. So tonight, I'm announcing the Eleanor Horn Initiative, a $50 million endowment for women's business education, leadership development, and entrepreneurial support. Because the best way to honor her legacy isn't just protecting what she built, it's making sure the next generation doesn't have to fight as hard as she did, or as hard as I did, to claim the space they deserve. The applause was thunderous. People stood, some wiping tears, others nodding with fierce recognition. Ashley saw her father in the front row, pride written across his face. Trevor gave her a thumbs up. Patricia Cromwell raised her glass in salute. After the formal program ended, Ashley was surrounded by people wanting to talk, to share their stories, to ask about opportunities. She listened to each one, made connections, offered advice, and felt the weight of her grandmother's expectations settling on her shoulders, not as burden, but as wings. That was extraordinary, a voice said behind her, and Ashley turned to find a man she didn't immediately recognize. He was tall, had kind eyes, and held himself with quiet confidence that didn't need announcement. "Thank you," Ashley said, offering her hand. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" "Marcus Chen," he said, then caught her expression and laughed. "I know. The name is incredibly common. My parents weren't creative. I'm a professor at the university. Actually heard you speak at a conference last year. Your thoughts on authentic leadership versus performative excellence changed how I teach my students." They talked for 20 minutes, conversation flowing easily between business philosophy and education reform, and what it meant to build legacy instead of just achieving success. Marcus was intelligent without being condescending, successful without needing to broadcast it, and when he asked if Ashley might be interested in collaborating on a research project about intellectual property in corporate settings, she found herself genuinely excited by the idea. "I should let you get back to your guests," Marcus said eventually, "but I hope we can continue this conversation maybe over coffee sometime." "I'd like that," Ashley said, meaning it. After he left, Kira appeared at her elbow. Was that actual chemistry I just witnessed? Did Ashley Horn just flirt with someone? That wasn't flirting, that was networking. That was absolutely flirting. And he seems lovely. No wedding ring, good posture, laughed at your jokes without that desperate quality Ben always had. I approve. Ashley laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months, maybe years. "It's too soon. It's been 6 months since the divorce and 3 years since you had actual joy in your marriage. I'd say it's right on time." Kira squeezed her arm. "Your grandmother would tell you that life is too short to wait for perfect timing. She'd tell you that if someone makes you feel seen and valued, you should at least have coffee and see what happens." "When did you become so wise?" "I've always been this wise. You were just too busy being in love with an idiot to notice." The rest of the evening blurred into conversations and photographs and promises to follow up with people whose projects Ashley wanted to support. By the time she made it home, it was past midnight, and her feet were aching from heels she'd worn too long. She made tea, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on her balcony, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Ben was probably sleeping in his studio apartment, living the life he'd built with lies and theft. Ashley didn't waste energy hating him anymore. He'd taught her essential lessons about who she was and who she refused to be. That was enough. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Thanks for a great conversation. Let me know when you're free for that coffee. Looking forward to continuing the discussion about whether intellectual property laws adequately address modern collaboration dynamics. I have theories." Ashley smiled and typed back, "Theories sound promising. How about next Tuesday?" His response was immediate. "Perfect. I'll find somewhere quiet where we can talk without worrying about being overheard. Academic gossip is worse than corporate gossip." She laughed, set down her phone, and looked at the framed photo on her side table. It was her and Eleanor, taken the summer before her grandmother died. They were in the garden, laughing at something long forgotten, and Eleanor's hand rested on Ashley's shoulder with obvious love and pride. "I did it, Grandma," Ashley whispered. "I waited. I learned who loved me for real, and who just loved what I could give them. It hurt like hell, but I survived it. And I'm building something good now, something that would make you proud." The photo didn't answer, but Ashley felt her grandmother's presence anyway, the legacy of strength and integrity that had carried her through the worst of it and would carry her forward into whatever came next. She was no longer Ben's wife, or even Ben's ex-wife. She wasn't defined by what she'd escaped or who'd tried to erase her. She was Ashley Horn, granddaughter of Eleanor Horn, builder of empires, supporter of women who needed someone to believe in them, and someone who'd finally learned that the right kind of love doesn't require you to disappear. The city lights twinkled below, full of possibility and promise. Ashley finished her tea, checked her calendar for tomorrow's meetings, and went to bed with the windows open and her grandmother's letter on her nightstand. She'd survived the erasure, fought back against the theft, and emerged as someone stronger than she'd been before the battle began. And that, she thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was the kind of ending Eleanor Horne would have written herself.